Well, it's already time to talk about the midterm for the class. So get your notebook ready. I'm going to do a little bit on the new readings and the assignment for the midterm. As usual, I'll do another couple of videos that go along with this one, but this is just sort of an introductory one to kind of get you ready to do this midterm assignment. So as always, make sure you read the directions, take a look online on Blackboard under the readings, quizzes, and writing assignments folder. You'll see the assignment sheet, as always, for the midterm. And you'll also see the readings in the folder. And you can tell it's time for the midterm. I have a hat on, I got a hoodie on. It's chilly in my office here at home today as we get further into the fall season. So it's time for the midterm. And one of the first things I should mention about it is that I always use the midterm, no matter what class I'm teaching, no matter whether it's in person, whether it's online, as a way to sort of pause and reflect on the first half of the class, and then to look at what we're doing in the second half of the class. So at this point, you've done 3 papers, you've done 3 quizzes, and so now it's time to sort of take a look at what we've done. And in order to do that, and I'll do a screen share here in a second of the directions, you'll see that there's 2 parts to the midterm. You're going to turn them in together, so please don't turn them in separately. They should be in the same Word or Google Doc file. But what they do is they let you reflect back on the writing that you've already did in those first 3 papers. And then they look forward to the next paper that we do, which will be paper number 4. So this is sort of an assignment that actually, when I have in-person classes, I do as an in-class writing. So it's done as sort of an in-class sort of reflection. And you can kind of see that in the directions in terms of how it works. Because one of the important elements of being a good writer and improving as a writer is to not only do the work, as we've been doing, every 2 weeks where we have a paper, because that practice is essential. It's like anything else. And I've said this before in other videos. It's like learning an instrument. It's learning to be a good athlete. It's learning to do anything. It just takes practice and time, but it also takes reflection. And that's partly how the midterm that I'm giving you for this semester is designed. It's designed to kind of give you that time to reflect on what we've done and then to look forward to what we're going to be doing next. So let me do the screen share and let me show you these directions. And this will kind of get you started with some ideas on this. Now, for the midterm, the readings are also readings that we're going to use for paper number 4. So as I said, it's also a preview for what we're doing after we do this midterm. But there's 2 sections to it. The first part of it, you're going to write me a letter. There is a sample letter in Blackboard. I'll do that. I'll show you that in a separate video, because you are going to use the typical letter, formal letter format to write this. So it's going to look a little bit different than our previous papers. And I've put up a sample letter so you can see how to format it, which again, I'll talk about in a separate video. But you're writing this letter, as you've seen if you've read the directions, to one of the writers that we've already read this semester. So there's nobody new to read other than Cisneros, which is for part 2. I'll get to that in a second. But for the first part of the midterm, you're writing a letter, 4-paragraph letter, formal letter. And in the letter, you're writing to one of these writers. So you're writing to Mike Rose, Toni Morrison, Dwayne Johnson, Alyssa Harrod, Sinead O'Connor, or Evelyn Glenn. You got to pick one of them. You pick one of the writers that we've read so far this semester, one of these writers that we've already written about, and then you're going to write a letter to them. And in the letter, and I've broken it down here so you can see, all the structures listed here for you. You are going, first of all, to select one of them, and then you'll have 4 paragraphs. And I've broken down how to set up those paragraphs, so you can read that over as you go through this. But the goal of this letter is to think about which of the articles we've read that you thought was especially interesting, especially well written. Maybe it was written in a style that you weren't used to or that you hadn't read before in any other class. Maybe there was something about their use of description, their use of argument that you found interesting. And again, that could be any of these writers that we did in the first half of the semester. And you're basically going to write a letter to them asking for writing advice. So you're going to have your introductory paragraph. You'll have a paragraph where you'll explain a little bit, about, as I say here in your second paragraph of the letter, explain what your paper was about, the one that you're writing to them about. Now that you've had some time to look back on it and on the comments that I wrote, what do you think of the paper? What do you think you did well on it? And what could you have improved? So the second paragraph of this letter, after you've introduced yourself, is basically telling Dwayne Johnson, for example, if you want to write a letter to The Rock. Dear Dwayne Johnson, here's who I am. I'm a student at Harper College. I'm studying to be a nurse. I'm studying to be an engineer. I'm studying to be a teacher. And here's one of the papers I did this semester that I struggled a little bit with. And so that's your second paragraph. You talk about the paper that you thought you struggled the most with. So what, in other words, if you were going to revise that paper, when we are going to have a revision assignment later in the semester, so this midterm sets that up a little bit. I'm asking you to kind of go back through the first 3 papers, especially if you haven't already done so, read through my comments, and then pick the one that was the weakest and say, okay, how did you do on this paper? How could you have done better on it? And so part of the point of this letter is asking for advice from this professional writer, like to say to them, well, Mike Rose, I read your article about your mom and about your uncle, and I really like how you use description, and I really like how you use supporting examples. So I'd like to know how you did that. That's your 3rd paragraph. So the 3rd paragraph of this letter is going to then talk about their article, what you liked about it, what you thought was effective, what you'd like to learn how to do, in other words. Okay, so you're telling them about a paper maybe you've done that you wasn't your strongest, and then you're asking them for help based on what you've read of theirs. So if you like Sinead O'Connor and you really like the kind of mystical religious dimension that she gives to her writing, you can talk about that. You can say, well, when I was writing paper number 1 about my job, I didn't go into enough description. I think I could have done this better. I think I could have stated my thesis better. But, Sinead O'Connor, I noticed in your essay on the piano, you're very direct. You're very concrete in your examples. You give sort of poetic descriptions. How do you do that? So you're doing 2 things there. You're kind of reviewing the work that you already did and then reflecting on it, but you're also asking questions, advice, basically. And so that's what this letter is. It's basically, to kind of sum up the first half of it, you're writing a letter to a professional writer whose work you've read to ask for advice on what you can do to improve your work as you get into the second half of English 101. Now that you've got these 3 papers under your belt that you worked on and completed in the first half of the semester, along with the quizzes. That's the first part of it. It's 4 paragraphs long. Doesn't require any other new sources. You can bring in a passage and a quotation from one of these previous readings, but you know how to do that already, because again, we've already written about these essays. And there is, again, a sample letter on Blackboard that you can take a look at. So that's the first part. Now, second part, the short response, is about a Chicago writer and musician named Jamila Woods. And so the reason I'm asking you to read those Sandra Cisneros essays for next week is that they tie in with Jamila Woods. And that's, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but when we get to paper 5, you're going to have some prompts that relate to Jamila Woods and Gwendolyn Brooks and Sandra Cisneros and John Porcellino, who are all these Chicago writers. Chicago, or in some cases, were originally from Chicago, then relocated, but they're all Chicago-based writers, essentially, that we're going to be working on for papers 4 and 5. So this second part, the short answer that's only 2 paragraphs long, it's a discussion of this poem. So you'll link to the poem by Jamila Woods. You'll read it. You can also hear her reading it herself. I've got a little link to the YouTube clip where she reads the poem. And then you're going to write a response to it. And that's a bit of a preview for the second part of the semester. Paper 4, we're going to get more into Cisneros and Woods. And as I mentioned, John Porcellino, the cartoonist that we're also going to be reading. And so this is a preview for what we're doing in the second half. So you're going to respond to that poem. And again, I'll do another video next week where I talk more about the poem itself and how to respond to it and how it ties in with Cisneros. Cisneros is a really important, very significant Chicago poet and short story writer who's had a big influence on people like Jamila Woods. So there's a lot of linkage. In fact, you'll even notice when you read the Sandra Cisneros pieces that one of them is a letter that she wrote to her hero, the writer Gwendolyn Brooks, another Chicago poet that I just mentioned. So that letter itself that's in the readings, it was where I originally got the idea for part 1 of this midterm several years ago now. So you'll kind of see how she structures that letter to her hero in the readings for next week. But this is the second part. So again, the midterm is in 2 parts. The first part is a 4-paragraph letter to one of these writers, and it's explained here how you have to approach that. And then part 2 is a short response of 2 paragraphs, which responds to this Jamila Woods poem. And I should have mentioned, you probably know Jamila Woods because she's done a lot of work with Chance the Rapper. She's done backing vocals on a couple of his songs. He's also contributed to some of her records. She's fantastic, great writer. Really talented, great teacher, just a really inspiring figure of these modern, younger Chicago musicians and poets. Really good stuff, and I hope you enjoy the poem that you read. But you'll notice that the way that this is structured, you got 4 paragraphs to write for the first part, you got 2 paragraphs to write for the second part. So it's basically like another 6-paragraph essay like we've been doing, but it's split up and it's again in a slightly different format because it's the midterm. And again, it's my way of having us reflect on what we did so far and also having us think about what we're going to be doing next. Okay. And in the second half of the class, we're doing papers 4 and 5, which are going to have some research components where you're going to be using the Harper online databases to find some sources. And then towards the end of the semester, as I've mentioned to some of you who've asked, we're going to do the revision assignment that's going to give you an opportunity to revise one of those earlier papers. So part of my reasoning behind the midterm, especially the first half of it, is a way to have you look back at those earlier papers, look at my comments, look at where you are. What have you learned so far? What do you want to keep learning? What else can I help you with as we get into the second half of the semester? So let me stop that screen share here and just sum up. I hope you enjoy the Saunders-Cisneros readings. They're under the midterm folder. There's a couple of other supplementary readings in there from Gwendolyn Brooks that you're not required to read right now. It's just the essays from Cisneros, and you're going to see them. There's a PDF of them in Blackboard. Actually, you know what? Let me do a quick screen share again just to show you, because there's a couple of readings in that folder that'll come into play when we get into, as I said, more into the second half of the semester. So if you're looking in here and you're going through your midterm readings, if you take a look here, these are the ones you want to take a look at. Saunders-Cisneros, From a House of My Own. So those are the pieces that I'd ask you to read for next week. And that also includes the sample letter that she at one time wrote to her writing hero, Gwendolyn Brooks, another great Chicago poet. This is the sample letter. So this is a letter I had to write to Alan Moore, if you're familiar with him. He's a graphic novelist. He wrote Watchmen. It's a graphic novel that the HBO series is based on. And several years ago, I was doing some research on some of his work and wrote him a letter. He's very kind to write me back and answer some questions. So I put in that sample letter. It's 4 paragraphs long. The content is not exactly what you're doing for the midterm, but you can see how to set up a formal letter. So you can take a look at that. And then the Brooks and the Cisneros and Brooks poems, this is just more context for the second part of the midterm. You can kind of get a sense more of how most Chicago poets write, and they write in this very blunt, very funny style, actually. So I hope you enjoy it. And then Gwendolyn Brooks is just for you. If you want to flip through some of her other poems, because she's had such an impact on Jamila Woods and Cisneros, she can. But the reading you're required to do for next week is the Saunders-Cisneros essays, and that's this first one here in the PDF. So make sure you take a look at that. All right, I can stop the screen share. I probably should have shown you that before. So again, I want to thank you for all the work you've done so far this semester. I appreciate the time and the effort that you've put into it. If you have any questions as we go here into the midterm, please let me know. Let me know how I can help. In the next video I'll talk more about Cisneros herself and give you some more ideas about how to write this letter, which again is doubling as kind of a self-reflection on your own writing. All right. So I hope you have a great rest of the afternoon. I'll talk to you in the next video, and I hope you're enjoying the weather. It's a little gloomy out today, as I said here, a little gloomy and cold. But I kind of like this weather sometimes, especially this time of the year when we've had a long and kind of humid summer. It's kind of nice when the temperatures cool down a little bit. And I love wearing hats. If you remember nothing else from this class, 2 things you really need to do in life. You got to read the directions to get by. 3 things. You got to find something you love to do, and you got to pursue it with all your heart. And you got to have good hats. It's really important, especially in the kind of climate we live in. I got a collection of hats, and I cherish them. You know, it might be part of where I'm from. Everybody always wore hats quite a bit back on the East Coast. So I've gotten my hats out for the fall season. Okay, well, that's enough for this video. Again, please email me if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next video. Talk to you then.